I watched my daughter read the letter through her kitchen window. I shouldn't have been there. Parked across the street like some stalker, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. But I needed to see her face when she opened it. I needed to know if 23 pages of bank statements and receipts could do what my words never could. She was sitting at her kitchen table. Same table where 3 weeks ago she told me to mind my own business and get out of her house. Same table where I'd eaten Thanksgiving dinner in silence, while she bragged about the trips to Maui she couldn't afford. She picked up the envelope I'd left on her porch that morning. Thick, bulky, her name written in my careful handwriting across the front. I should have left right then, driven back to Coeur d'Alene and my new apartment and my new life where nobody needed me. But I stayed. She opened it. I watched her pull out the letter first. She read it standing up, one hand pressed against the counter like she needed something solid to hold on to. Her face went pale. Then she sat down hard, like her legs had stopped working. Then came the bank statements. Page after page after page. 6 years of mortgage payments I'd made in secret. Credit card bills I'd covered. Car payments I'd caught when she fell behind. The receipt from the jeweler who bought my mother's sapphire ring for $3,200. Money that went straight into Vanessa's account, while she thought Trevor's promotion had saved them. She spread the papers across the table like evidence at a crime scene. Her hands were shaking. I could see that even from across the street, even through the window, even in the dim morning light. She picked up her phone, put it down, picked it up again. I knew she was trying to call me, but I'd changed my number before I left Spokane. Cut every line of communication except the one that mattered most. The truth, printed in black and white, impossible to ignore. Her husband Trevor walked into the kitchen. I watched him read over her shoulder, watched his face change from confusion to anger to something uglier. They started fighting. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I knew the script. He was blaming her for lying about their finances. She was defending herself, trying to explain that she hadn't known, that her mother had been covering everything without telling her. He grabbed his keys off the counter and walked out. Just like that, Vanessa stood there alone in her kitchen, surrounded by evidence of every sacrifice I'd made, watching her marriage dissolve in real time. She sank to the floor, not dramatically, not like in the movies. She just folded in on herself, sitting on the cold tile with her back against the cabinet, staring at nothing. I started my car. I'd driven 2 hours to see this moment. I'd needed to know if the truth would finally make her understand what her words had cost me, what that Thanksgiving dinner had taken from both of us. Mind your own business, old lady, and get out of here. So I had. I'd packed everything that mattered into my Honda Accord and disappeared across the state line into Idaho. Rented a furnished apartment overlooking a lake I'd never seen before. Changed my number. Stopped answering to the name Mom. I'd worked double shifts for 43 years as an ICU nurse at Sacred Heart Medical Center. I'd raised Vanessa alone after my husband died in a logging accident when she was 7. I'd sold my mother's jewelry. I'd liquidated my retirement account. I'd taken weekend jobs as a home health aide even after I retired, driving through snowstorms to rural farmhouses just so I could wire money into her account without her knowing. And she'd called me an old lady and told me to leave her house in front of 20 people, in front of her husband who'd just abandoned her, in front of her children who barely looked up from their phones, in front of my sister who'd flown in from Boise, in front of Trevor's entire family who'd watched me stand up from that table, fold my napkin, and walk out without saying a word. Because what was there to say? I'd already said everything that mattered. I'd put it all in that letter. The last line was still burned into my brain. I hope you can finally mind your own business now. You're on your own. Mom. I pulled away from the curb and headed back toward I-90, back toward Idaho, back toward the life I was building from nothing because my daughter had made it clear there was no room for me in hers. My phone, my new phone, the one with the new number, was in my purse. I'd turned it off 3 days ago after listening to Vanessa's 17th voicemail, after hearing her sob into the phone at 2 in the morning, begging me to call her back, saying she didn't know who she was anymore. I'd almost called her back. Almost. But then I remembered sitting in that exam room at the clinic where I'd just started working part-time. I remembered an old rancher named Roy telling me that loving someone doesn't mean drowning in their absence. It means learning how to swim again. So I'd let her drown. Just a little. Just enough to see if she could find the bottom and push herself back up. 3 weeks had passed since Thanksgiving. 3 weeks since I'd left that envelope on her porch and driven away. 3 weeks of silence while I volunteered at the food bank and attended daily mass and walked along the lake every morning watching the sun rise over the Bitterroot Mountains. 3 weeks of peace I hadn't felt in 31 years, but I'd needed to see her face. I'd needed to know if the truth had landed, if she understood what she'd thrown away when she told me to get out. And now I knew. She understood. The question was, what would she do about it? I merged onto the highway heading east. My phone was still off. The envelope was delivered. The truth was out. Everything I'd hidden for 6 years was now sitting on Vanessa's kitchen table while her husband packed a bag and her perfect life collapsed around her. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me felt sick. But mostly I felt free. Free from the weight of carrying her. Free from the lie that love meant erasing myself. Free from the belief that being a good mother meant never letting your daughter fall. She was falling now. Hard. Fast. And I wasn't there to catch her. I didn't know if she'd sell the house. I didn't know if Trevor would come back. I didn't know if she'd figure out how to pay the mortgage or the credit cards or any of the bills I'd been covering while she booked vacations and bought expensive boots and lived like someone whose safety net was permanent. All I knew was that it wasn't my problem anymore. I'd done my part. I'd raised her. I'd sacrificed everything. I'd given her every advantage I never had. And she'd spit in my face. So now she got to figure it out alone. The way I'd figured it out at 37, when Michael died, and left me with a 7-year-old daughter and a mountain of medical debt, and no idea how to be both parents at once. I'd survived it. So would she. Or she wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't my job to save her anymore. The mountains rose up ahead of me, dark against the winter sky. Snow was coming. I could feel it in the air, that particular stillness that happens right before a storm. I'd need to get home before the roads got bad. Home. That word still felt strange. Not Spokane. Not the apartment on Maple Street, where I'd lived for 31 years. But Coeur d'Alene. The lake. The small one-bedroom with the balcony and the second-hand furniture and the 3 photos on the bookshelf. Home was wherever Vanessa wasn't. My phone buzzed in my purse. I ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. And again. 17 times in 20 minutes. I knew it was her. I knew she'd gotten my new number from Judith somehow. I knew she was desperate, panicking, trying to reach me before I disappeared completely. But I didn't answer. I just drove, east toward Idaho, toward the life I'd built in the wreckage of the one she'd destroyed, toward the woman I was becoming now that I wasn't anyone's mother anymore. I didn't know if I'd ever answer her calls. I didn't know if we'd ever sit across from each other again and try to rebuild what we'd broken. I didn't know if forgiveness was possible or if I even wanted it to be. All I knew was that I'd left that envelope on her porch for a reason, to show her the cost of the life she'd taken for granted, to prove that I wasn't just background noise, to make her understand that words have consequences. Mind your own business, old lady, and get out of here. So I did. And now she was alone with the truth, the same way I'd been alone for 31 years, the same way she'd made me feel at that Thanksgiving table, the same way I'd felt every single time she'd looked through me instead of at me. My phone was still buzzing. Text messages now. Dozens of them. I could feel the vibrations through the leather of my purse, insistent and desperate. I pulled over at a rest stop just past the state line. The parking lot was empty except for a semi-truck idling in the corner. I sat there with the engine running, heat blasting, staring at my purse like it was a bomb about to go off. I could answer. I could call her back. I could tell her I forgive her and drive back to Spokane and fix everything the way I always had. Or I could keep driving. I picked up my phone. 62 text messages, 43 missed calls. I scrolled through them without opening any, just enough to see the fragments. Mom, please. I didn't know I'm so sorry. Trevor left. Please come home. I turned the phone off, put it back in my purse, and kept driving. Because this story isn't about whether Vanessa deserves forgiveness. It's about whether I deserve to stop carrying her weight. And I don't know the answer yet, but I'm going to find out. I should have known something was wrong when Vanessa didn't hug me at the door. It was Thanksgiving morning 2024, and I'd driven across Spokane in the pre-dawn darkness with a Pyrex dish of green bean casserole balanced on the passenger seat. The same recipe I'd been making for 40 years, with the French's fried onions on top and just a hint of garlic powder my own mother taught me. The streets were empty except for a few joggers and the early shift workers heading toward the hospital district. I knew those streets like the back of my hand. Maple to Monroe, left on 14th, past the old Davenport Hotel where Michael proposed to me in 1976. Then up the hill towards South Hill, where Vanessa's Craftsman sat like a painted postcard, with its deep green trim and wraparound porch. I parked behind Trevor's black Escalade, always too big for the driveway, always taking up too much space, and gathered my things. The casserole, my purse, a gift bag with coloring books for Emma and Lucas, though I suspected they were too old for coloring now. Kids grow up so fast, especially when you only see them once a month. The porch light was on. Through the beveled glass of the front door, I could see movement, shadows passing back and forth. I rang the bell and waited, my breath making small clouds in the November cold. Spokane gets that dry, biting chill in late autumn, the kind that sneaks under your collar and makes your knuckles ache. I'd forgotten my gloves in the car. Vanessa opened the door wearing a cream-colored sweater and dark jeans, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She looked beautiful. She always did. High cheekbones like her father, my green eyes, that determined set to her jaw that got her through law school and the bar exam on her first try. "Hi, Mom," she said. Not hi, Mama-like when she was little. Not even a smile. Just a flat acknowledgement. Like I was the UPS driver dropping off a package. "Happy Thanksgiving, sweetheart," I said, leaning in for a hug. She turned her body slightly, accepted a brief, one-armed squeeze, and took the casserole dish from my hands. "You didn't have to bring anything. I told you we had everything covered." "I know, but I wanted to. It's tradition." She disappeared into the house without waiting for me to follow. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The house smelled like roasted turkey and cinnamon, sounds of football announcers drifting from the living room, where Trevor's father, a retired Boeing engineer named Dale, sat in the recliner with a Coors Light in his hand. He glanced up, gave me a brief nod, then returned his attention to the screen. The Seahawks were playing the Cowboys. I didn't care about football, but I knew the rhythms of these gatherings. The men watched the game. The women did everything else. In the kitchen, Vanessa's world was controlled chaos. Her mother-in-law, Diane, a rail-thin woman with silver hair and a permanent expression of mild disapproval, was mashing potatoes with an electric mixer. My sister Judith stood at the island chopping celery for stuffing, her reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "Ellie, you made it." I crossed the kitchen and hugged her properly. Judith and I hadn't always been close. 15 years apart will do that. But since our mother died 3 years ago, we'd made more of an effort. She lived in Boise now, taught 4th grade at a charter school, and had driven 5 hours that morning to be here. "Wouldn't miss it," I said. though part of me wondered if that was still true. Vanessa was pulling dinner rolls from the oven, her face flushed from the heat. "Mom, can you set the table? The china's in the dining room hutch. Not, could you help me? Or would you mind?" Just a command delivered without looking at me. I swallowed the small sting of it and nodded. Of course. The dining room was magazine perfect. Vanessa had always been good at that, making things look effortless and expensive. The long oak table could seat 14 comfortably, but today she'd added a folding table at the end to accommodate Trevor's brother's family, who'd driven up from Portland. White linen tablecloth, gold chargers under cream-colored plates, cloth napkins folded into something resembling swans, a centerpiece of amber chrysanthemums and eucalyptus that probably cost $80 at the florist on Monroe. I opened the hutch and carefully removed the china. Lenox pieces Vanessa had registered for when she married Trevor 12 years ago. I remembered standing in Macy's with her, watching her scan barcodes with that little gun, laughing about how grown up it felt to pick out wedding china. She'd been 26, so sure of herself, so in love. Now she was 38, and I wasn't sure what she was anymore. I set each place with quiet precision, the way my mother taught me. Dinner plate, salad plate, bread plate at 10 o'clock, forks on the left, knife and spoon on the right, blade facing inward. I was smoothing the last napkin when Emma wandered in, her face glued to her phone screen. "Hi, Grandma," she said without looking up. "Hi, Sweet Pea." I tried to catch her eye. "How's school going?" "Fine." "What grade are you in now? 7th? 8th? 8th? My goodness. You're practically in high school." She shrugged, thumbs moving rapidly across the screen. "Yeah." I waited for more, but nothing came. After a moment, she drifted back toward the living room, her attention never leaving the phone. I stood there holding a butter knife, feeling ridiculous. When had I become so irrelevant to my own grandchildren? Lucas was worse. At 10 years old, he barely acknowledged my existence. When I found him in the den playing a video game, something violent with explosions and shouting, I tried to ask him about school, about soccer, about anything. He gave me one-word answers and kept his eyes on the screen. Trevor walked past, squeezed Lucas's shoulder affectionately, and didn't even glance at me. By the time everyone gathered around the table at 3 o'clock, I felt like a ghost in my own family. 20 people crammed into that dining room. Trevor at the head of the table carving the turkey with theatrical flair. Vanessa at the other end, orchestrating the parade of side dishes. Trevor's brother Jason and his wife Kelsey, with their 3 loud boys, Dale and Diane, Judith beside me, bless her, and me, tucked at the far corner near the folding table, wedged between Jason's youngest son, who kept kicking the table leg, and an empty chair that held someone's coat. Trevor raised his wineglass. "Before we dig in, I just want to say how grateful I am for this beautiful family, this incredible meal my amazing wife put together, and the fact that the Hawks are up by 10 at halftime." Everyone laughed. Glasses clinked. Vanessa beamed at him. Nobody thanked me for 43 years of showing up. The meal began in a blur of passing dishes and overlapping conversations. The turkey was dry, I could tell from the first bite, but nobody said anything. Diane made a pointed comment about how her turkey was always brined for 24 hours. Vanessa's jaw tightened. Trevor poured more wine. I ate quietly, listening to fragments of conversation swirl around me. Jason talking about his tech startup, Kelsey complaining about Portland traffic, Dale rehashing some Boeing retirement drama from 15 years ago, the kids arguing over who got the biggest slice of pie, and Vanessa. Vanessa was talking about Maui. "We're flying out January 10th, she said, her voice bright with forced enthusiasm. 5 nights at the Grand Wailea. The kids are so excited. Diane raised an eyebrow. "Another vacation? Didn't you just go to Cabo in August?" "That was for Trevor's conference," Vanessa said quickly. "This is a real family trip. Sounds expensive, Dale muttered into his mashed potatoes. Trevor jumped in, all white teeth and confidence. We've been working hard. We deserve it. Besides, I just closed a huge commercial deal in the valley. Things are looking up. I knew that wasn't true. I knew because 2 weeks earlier I'd received a call from Chase Bank, a collections agent looking for Vanessa Hayes Mercer regarding an overdue credit card payment. The number on file was my old landline, which I'd kept active specifically so I could intercept these calls before they reached her. I'd given them my debit card number. Again. It was the 4th time that year. I also knew their mortgage was 3 months behind. I knew because I'd been paying it, anonymously, through their loan servicer. Vanessa thought Trevor's boss had given him a retention bonus. She had no idea I'd liquidated another chunk of my retirement fund. But sitting there at that table, watching her smile and lie to her in-laws about their financial stability, I felt something crack inside my chest. Not anger, not even disappointment, just a deep, bone-tired sadness. I set down my fork. "Vanessa," I said gently, leaning forward. "Can I talk to you about something after dinner?" She didn't even look at me. "Not now, Mom. We're eating." "I know, sweetheart. I just think..." "Mom, please." Trevor refilled her wineglass. Diane launched into a story about their own trip to Hawaii in 1987. The moment dissolved. I tried again during dessert. Vanessa was standing at the kitchen counter cutting pumpkin pie into perfect slices when I approached her. The kitchen had emptied out, everyone migrating back to the living room for more football. And I thought maybe, finally, we could talk. Just the two of us, like we used to. "Honey," I said softly, standing beside her. "I'm worried about you." Her hand stilled on the pie server. "What?" "The trips, the spending. I know things have been tight and I just want you to know." "Mom." She turned to face me, her expression hard. "I'm fine. We're fine. I don't need you to worry about me. I'm your mother. It's my job to worry. I'm 38 years old. I think I can handle my own life. I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying if you need help, I don't need help." Her voice was rising now, sharp enough that Judith glanced over from the sink where she was washing dishes. "What I need is for you to stop treating me like I'm still a child who can't balance a checkbook." "I never said..." "You didn't have to say it, Mom. It's in every look, every comment, every time you show up here with your Tupperware and your advice nobody asked for." I felt the words like a slap. "Vanessa, do you know how exhausting it is, having you hover over me all the time, waiting for me to screw up so you can swoop in and fix everything? That's not what I'm doing." "Then what are you doing?" I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I did, but it was too big and too complicated to fit into the space between the pie and the anger in her eyes. We stood there in silence, the sound of the football game drifting in from the other room. Someone scored a touchdown. Everyone cheered. "I'm sorry," I finally said. "I didn't mean to upset you. I just love you. I know you do." Her voice softened slightly, but her eyes didn't. "But sometimes love feels like criticism, and I'm tired of feeling like I'm failing in your eyes." "You're not failing." "Then stop acting like I am." She picked up 2 plates of pie and walked back into the dining room, leaving me standing there with my hands trembling and my throat tight. I should have left then. I should have grabbed my coat, thanked everyone for having me, and driven home. But I didn't. I told myself it was just stress. Vanessa was overwhelmed. The holidays made everyone tense. We'd talk later when things calmed down, and it would be okay. So I went back to the table. Trevor was telling a story about some client who'd backed out of a deal at the last minute. Some dramatic tale designed to make him look clever and indispensable. Everyone was laughing. Vanessa sat beside him, her hand resting on his arm, playing the role of the supportive wife. And I sat there, invisible again, pushing pie around my plate. That's when the conversation turned back to money. Jason asked Trevor about the commercial deal he'd mentioned earlier. Trevor launched into details. Square footage, zoning issues, commission projections. He talked in that smooth, practiced way of his, all confidence and vague promises. But I'd heard enough of these stories over the years to recognize the pattern. Big talk, bigger projections, and then, months later, quiet admissions that things fell through or got delayed. Vanessa jumped in, her voice a little too bright. Once that deal closes, we'll finally be able to pay off some debt. Get ahead for once. Trevor squeezed her hand. We're already ahead, babe. This is just icing. But I saw it. That flicker of worry in her eyes. The way her smile didn't quite reach the corners. The tightness in her shoulders. And I couldn't help myself. Maybe instead of Maui, I said quietly, you could put that money toward... Vanessa's head snapped toward me. Toward what, Mom? Everyone went silent. I'm just saying, if money's tight, money's not tight. But you just said... I said we're paying off debt. That's called being responsible. That's called managing our finances like adults. I know, honey. I just think maybe it's time to rethink some of these expenses. Rethink. She laughed, but it was cold. You mean cancel our family vacation? Stop living our lives? Sit home and pinch pennies like you did? The room felt airless. Vanessa, Trevor said quietly, a warning in his tone. But she didn't stop. Do you know what it was like growing up with you, Mom? Never going anywhere. Never having anything nice. Wearing Goodwill clothes to school while you worked triple shifts and acted like a martyr about it? You didn't have to say it. I felt it. Every single day. The weight of your sacrifices. And now you want me to do the same thing? Deny my kids a nice vacation so I can be as miserable as you were? I felt the blood drain from my face. Judith stood up. Vanessa, that's enough. No. Vanessa stood too, her chair scraping hard against the hardwood floor. It's not enough, because she does this every single time. She comes into my house, looks at my life, and finds it lacking. Well, I'm sorry I'm not good enough for you, Mom. I'm sorry I don't want to spend my whole life being small and scared and alone. Vanessa, my voice broke. Please. She looked at me then, really looked at me. And what I saw in her eyes wasn't anger. It was something worse. It was contempt. Mind your own business, old lady, she said, her voice cutting through the silence like glass. And get out of here. No one moved. No one breathed. I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me. Trevor's family, Judith, even the kids frozen in the doorway, waiting to see what I would do, waiting to see if I'd fight back, defend myself, make a scene. But I didn't. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. I folded my napkin and set it beside my plate. I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd given everything to, this person I'd loved more than my own life, and I saw a stranger. Okay, I said softly. Then I walked out of that dining room, out of that house, and into the cold November evening. I didn't cry in the car. I didn't call anyone. I just drove. I drove past the Davenport, past Sacred Heart, where I'd worked for 4 decades, past the apartment on Maple Street, where I'd lived alone since Michael died 31 years ago. I drove until the city lights faded and the highway stretched dark in front of me, illuminated only by my headlights and the faint glow of distant stars. Somewhere near the Idaho border, I pulled over at a rest stop. The parking lot was empty except for a semi-truck idling in the corner. I sat there with the engine running, heat blasting, and finally let myself feel it. Not the humiliation, not the hurt, the freedom. For the first time in 68 years, I had permission to disappear. My daughter had told me to leave, so I would. I pulled out my phone and called the landlord of a furnished apartment I'd seen online in Coeur d'Alene, a place I'd bookmarked months ago during one of those late-night moments when I let myself imagine a different life. A man answered, groggy with sleep. "I'll take it," I said. "I can pay 3 months up front. Cash." He hesitated. When do you want to move in? I looked at the clock on my dashboard. It was 11:47 p.m. on Thanksgiving night. Tomorrow, I said. And I meant it. I didn't sleep that night. I drove back to my apartment on Maple Street as the city slept, parked in my usual spot beneath the flickering streetlight, and sat in the darkness for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. The building was quiet, a 1960s brick walk-up with thin walls and cheaper rent than anything else in the neighborhood. I'd moved here after Michael died, after I sold our house because I couldn't bear to live in all those empty rooms alone. Vanessa had been in college then, living in the dorms at Gonzaga. She'd come home on weekends sometimes, but mostly I rattled around by myself, learning how to be a widow at 37. 31 years I'd lived in this apartment. 31 years of the same beige carpet, the same avocado green appliances the landlord refused to update, the same view of the parking lot and the back of the Safeway on Division Street. I'd made it home because I had to, because what other choice did I have? But walking in that night, I saw it differently. I saw how small I'd let my life become. The living room was cramped. A floral sofa I'd bought at an estate sale in 1998. A coffee table scarred with water rings, shelves crammed with paperback novels, and framed photos of Vanessa at every age. Vanessa in her first communion dress. Vanessa graduating from high school. Vanessa on her wedding day, radiant in white lace, looking at Trevor like he'd hung the moon. I'd taken most of these photos myself. I'd been there for every milestone, every moment that mattered. And tonight she'd told me to get out. I made myself a cup of tea, chamomile, the kind that's supposed to calm you down, and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. My hands were still shaking, but my mind was strangely clear, focused. I Googled furnished apartments, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and scrolled through listings until I found the one I'd bookmarked. A one-bedroom overlooking the lake, available immediately, $200 a month. The photos showed hardwood floors, a small balcony, clean white walls. It looked like a place where someone could start over. I called the landlord again. His name was Frank. He sounded more awake this time, probably caffeinated, and we arranged to meet at the property at noon. I told him I'd have a cashier's check ready. He asked if I needed to see it first, and I said no. I trusted the photos. What I didn't say was that I needed to trust something right now, and an empty apartment 2 hours away seemed safer than anything in Spokane. By 3 a.m., I was packing. I didn't have much. I'd never been someone who accumulated things. Most of my furniture was old and worn, nothing worth moving. So I focused on what mattered. Clothes, a few dishes, my mother's quilts, the box of letters Michael wrote me during our courtship. I pulled my grandmother's rosary from the drawer beside my bed, the crystal beads worn smooth from decades of prayers, and tucked it into my purse. I wasn't sure why. I hadn't prayed the rosary in years, not since my mother's funeral. But holding it in my hand made me feel less alone. The photo albums were harder. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, surrounded by decades of memories, flipping through images of a life I'd built and lost and built again. Michael and me on our honeymoon in Seattle, standing in front of the Space Needle in matching rain jackets. Vanessa as a toddler, covered in birthday cake frosting. The two of us at her high school graduation, her arm around my shoulders, both of us grinning like we'd won the lottery. When had she stopped looking at me like that? I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. It had been gradual, a slow erosion of closeness that I told myself was normal. She got busy with her career. She got married. She had kids. I was supposed to step back, give her space, let her build her own life. But somewhere in all that stepping back, I'd disappeared entirely. Or maybe I'd let myself disappear. I packed 3 albums, the ones that mattered most, and left the rest on the shelf. Whoever moved into this apartment next could throw them away or keep them. I didn't care anymore. By dawn, I'd loaded my Honda Accord with everything I couldn't leave behind. It wasn't much. 2 suitcases of clothes, a box of kitchen items, my favorite coffee mug, the cast iron skillet I'd used for 40 years, a wooden spoon my mother gave me when I got married, the quilts, the letters, the photos, my nursing textbooks, even though I'd never open them again. I couldn't throw away that much of myself. The sun was rising over the South Hill, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, when I made my last trip to the car. My neighbors were still asleep. The whole world felt suspended, holding its breath. I stood in the doorway of my apartment one final time, looking at the empty rooms I was leaving behind. I thought about calling Vanessa, explaining, apologizing, even though I wasn't sure what I'd be apologizing for. But then I remembered her face, the contempt in her eyes. Mind your own business, old lady. So instead I sat down at the kitchen table one last time and wrote a letter. I've never been good with words. Not the way Michael was. He could write poetry, love letters that made me cry, birthday cards that felt like little gifts in themselves. I was practical, straightforward. I said what I meant, and meant what I said. But that morning, I needed to say things I'd never been able to say out loud. I started with the truth. Vanessa, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I'm not telling you where, because I don't want you to come looking for me. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I need you to understand something, and the only way I know how to make you understand is to show you what you couldn't see when I was standing right in front of you. My hand cramped as I wrote. I wasn't used to longhand anymore. Everything was digital now. Texts and emails and electronic medical records. But this needed to be real, tangible, something she could hold. You told me to mind my own business, so I am. Starting now, your life is entirely your own. The mortgage payments I've been making since 2019, they stop today. The credit card bills I've been covering for the past 6 years, you'll start seeing those statements in your name. The car payment I caught up last month when you were 3 months behind, that's yours now too. I paused, staring at the words on the page. They looked harsh, cold, but they were also true. I never told you about any of this because I didn't want you to feel guilty. I wanted you to feel safe. I wanted you to build the life you deserved, without worrying about money the way I did when you were growing up. But I see now that I did you a disservice. I made you think you were standing on your own 2 feet, when really, I was holding you up, and you resented me for it anyway. The sun was higher now, streaming through the kitchen window. I could hear Mrs. Patterson upstairs running her shower. The building was waking up. I needed to finish this before I lost my nerve. Enclosed are copies of every payment I've made on your behalf. Bank statements, receipts, wire transfer confirmations. I kept records because I'm a nurse. We document everything. I'm not showing you this to make you feel bad. I'm showing you this so you understand why I have to leave. I sold my mother's sapphire ring, the one she wore every day of her life, the one she left to me when she died. I sold the gold locket your father gave me on our wedding day. I liquidated my retirement account. I took weekend shifts as a home health aide, driving to farmhouses in the snow to care for strangers, because I couldn't bear the thought of you losing your house. And you called me an old lady and told me to get out. My vision blurred. I set down the pen and pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes until I saw stars. I would not cry. Not yet. Not until this was done. I don't blame you, Vanessa. I really don't. You didn't know. How could you? I made sure you wouldn't know. But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep erasing myself to make room for your life. Your father used to say that love without boundaries isn't love. It's martyrdom. I didn't understand what he meant until now. I loved you so much that I stopped loving myself. And somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as a person. I became a burden, an obligation. The old woman who shows up with casserole nobody wants. So I'm leaving. Not to punish you, not to make you chase me, but because I need to remember who I was before I became your safety net. I hope you figure out how to stand on your own. I hope Trevor's big deal comes through. I hope Maui is everything you want it to be. But more than anything, I hope you learn to mind your own business. Because it's yours now, all of it. I love you. I always will. Mom, P.S. The mortgage is due on the 15th. I'm sure you'll manage just fine. But I folded the letter carefully and slid it into an envelope, along with 23 pages of documentation. Bank statements showing transfers to Vanessa's account, credit card payoff confirmations, the receipt from the jeweler who bought my mother's ring, $3,200, which went straight to Chase Bank, the title transfer when I sold my car 2 years ago and bought a cheaper one so I could pay off Vanessa's Honda Pilot. Every single piece of evidence that I'd been keeping her afloat, while she congratulated herself for treading water. I sealed the envelope, addressed it in my careful nurse's handwriting. Vanessa Hayes Mercer, 2847 S. Grand Boulevard, Spokane, WA 99203. Then I drove to her house one last time. It was 7:30 a.m. on the day after Thanksgiving. The street was quiet, most people still sleeping off turkey and wine. Trevor's Escalade sat in the driveway, gleaming black in the morning light. The porch light was off. The house looked peaceful, perfect, like a postcard of a life well lived. I parked across the street and sat there for 5 minutes, engine idling, trying to decide if I was really going to do this. Part of me wanted to knock on the door, wake Vanessa up, hand her the envelope and watch her face as she realized what she'd lost. But I didn't, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about release. I crossed the street, climbed the porch steps, and tucked the envelope under the mat where I knew she'd find it. Then I walked back to my car and drove away without looking back. The drive to Coeur d'Alene took 2 hours through some of the most beautiful country in the Northwest. I-90 cuts east through the Idaho Panhandle, past pine forests and granite cliffs, and the Spokane River winding silver through the valleys. I'd driven this road 100 times. Day trips to hike in the Bitterroots, weekend getaways when Michael was still alive, visits to friends who'd retired to lakefront property. But this time felt different. This time, I wasn't visiting. I was disappearing. I met Frank at the apartment at noon, just like we'd arranged. He was older than I expected, maybe 70, with weathered hands and kind eyes. And he didn't ask questions when I handed him the cashier's check. He showed me around the apartment, pointing out the thermostat and the breaker box and the garbage chute. And then he gave me the keys and left me alone. The apartment was small but bright, hardwood floors, white walls, a kitchenette with a 2-burner stove, and a dorm-sized refrigerator. The bedroom barely fit a double bed, and the bathroom had one of those old clawfoot tubs I'd always found charming in magazines, but never thought I'd actually use. The balcony overlooked the lake, all that cold, clean water stretching toward the mountains. I stood there on the balcony, breathing air that didn't smell like Spokane, and felt something shift inside my chest. Not happiness. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of space where happiness could grow. I spent the rest of the day unpacking. I hung my clothes in the tiny closet. I arranged my mother's quilts on the bed. I set the cast iron skillet on the stove and the wooden spoon in a jar on the counter. I put Michael's letters in the drawer of the nightstand next to my grandmother's rosary, and I placed exactly 3 photos on the bookshelf. One of Michael and me on our wedding day, one of Vanessa as a baby, and one of my mother. The rest I left in the box. I didn't need a museum of my own past. I needed room to build something new. That night, I walked down to the lake as the sun set. The temperature had dropped into the 20s and the water looked black and infinite. A few other people were out. Joggers with reflective vests, a couple holding hands, a man throwing a tennis ball for a golden retriever. Normal people living normal lives. Nobody knew me here. Nobody needed me. Nobody expected anything. I sat on a bench and watched the last light fade from the sky. and for the first time in decades, I felt like I could breathe. 3 weeks passed. I didn't call Vanessa. I didn't text. I didn't check her social media. I'd never been good at that anyway. I simply existed in the quiet space I'd carved out for myself. Every morning I walked along the lake. The cold didn't bother me. I'd spent 40 years working in hospitals, moving between overheated rooms and freezing parking lots. I bought a good winter coat at a consignment shop downtown and a pair of insulated boots, and I walked until my legs ached and my mind cleared. I found a small Catholic church 3 blocks from my apartment, St. Pius X, a modest brick building with stained glass windows that glowed gold in the early morning light. I started attending daily mass, slipping into the back pew before dawn, kneeling on worn cushions that smelled like incense and old wood. The priest was young, maybe 40, with kind eyes and a homily style that reminded me of Michael. He talked about forgiveness, about grace, about the way God makes all things new. I wasn't sure I believed in new things anymore, but I wanted to. On Thursdays, I volunteered at the food bank. It felt good to be useful again, to move with purpose, to hand boxes of canned goods and fresh bread to people who needed them. Most of the other volunteers were retirees like me, former teachers, accountants, electricians, people who'd worked their whole lives and still wanted to contribute something. We didn't talk much about our pasts. We just showed up, did the work, and went home. I started reading again. Novels I'd bought years ago and never opened. Mysteries and literary fiction, and a biography of Dorothy Day that I'd found at a used bookstore on Sherman Avenue. I made myself tea in the evenings and sat on the balcony with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching the lights shimmer on the water, turning pages until my eyes grew heavy. And slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice, I started to feel like a person again. Not someone's mother, not someone's obligation. Just Eleanor. Eleanor Hayes, 68 years old, living alone in a small apartment by a lake, figuring out what came next. I didn't think about Vanessa every minute of every day, but she was always there, a low hum beneath everything. I wondered if she'd found the envelope. I wondered if she'd opened it. I wondered what she'd thought when she saw those bank statements, those receipts, the evidence of everything I'd sacrificed. I wondered if she'd tried to call, but I'd changed my number before I left Spokane. A clean break, no forwarding address. If she wanted to find me, she'd have to work for it. And maybe that was the point. The phone calls started on December 14th. I'd gotten a new phone, a cheap prepaid smartphone from Target, and given the number to exactly 4 people. Judith, the landlord, my old supervisor at Sacred Heart, just in case they needed to reach me for paperwork, and the priest at St. Pius X. Nobody else knew how to contact me. I liked it that way, but Judith must have slipped. My phone rang at 6:47 a.m. on a Monday morning. I was sitting on the balcony with coffee, watching the sun rise over the Bitterroots, when the screen lit up with a Spokane area code I didn't recognize. I let it ring. It rang again 30 seconds later, and again, and again. 17 calls in 20 minutes. Then the text started. Mom. Please call me Mom. I need to talk to you. Please, I'm sorry, Mom. Please. I set the phone face down on the table and went inside to make breakfast. My hands were shaking. I scrambled eggs and toasted bread and ate slowly, methodically, forcing myself to chew, even though I wasn't hungry. The phone kept buzzing. By noon, there were 43 missed calls and 62 text messages. I finally picked up the phone and scrolled through them, my stomach churning. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. Why didn't you tell me? How could you not tell me? Mom, please, I can't breathe. Trevor left. He's gone. He took everything. The bank called about the mortgage. Mom, please, I don't know what to do. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Please come home. I read every message twice. And then I turned off my phone. I didn't turn it back on for 3 days. I walked, I prayed, I volunteered, I read. I sat on the balcony and watched winter storms roll across the lake, the water turning gray and violent, waves crashing against the shore. I thought about Vanessa collapsing under the weight of all those bills, all those responsibilities she'd never had to carry because I'd carried them for her. I thought about Trevor leaving. Of course he'd left. Men like that always did when things got hard. I thought about my grandchildren, Emma and Lucas, trying to understand why their life was suddenly falling apart. And I thought about Michael. The night before he died, we'd lain in bed talking about Vanessa. She was 7 years old, asleep in the next room, completely unaware that her father had a stage 4 glioblastoma and 6 months to live. Michael held my hand in the darkness and said, "Promise me something. Anything. Don't make her feel guilty for living her life. Don't sacrifice so much that she grows up thinking love is supposed to hurt." I'd promised. And then I'd spent the next 30 years breaking that promise. On the 3rd day, I turned my phone back on. The messages had stopped. The calls had stopped. There was just one voicemail, left at 2:17 a.m. the night before. I almost deleted it without listening, but I didn't. I pressed play and heard my daughter's voice, broken, raw, barely recognizable. "Mom," a long shuddering breath. I read the letter. I saw everything. The ring, the money, all of it. And her voice cracked. "I don't know how to. I don't even know who I am anymore. I thought I was standing on my own. I thought I was doing okay, but I was standing on you. I've been standing on you my whole life, and I didn't even see it." A pause. I could hear her crying. "Trevor's gone. He left 2 days ago. Took his clothes and his laptop and just left. He said he couldn't handle the pressure. He said I was too much, and maybe he's right. Maybe I am too much, or maybe I'm not enough. I don't know anymore." Another breath. "The bank called about the mortgage. They said the payment stopped in November, and I didn't understand, but then I found your letter and Mom, how could you do all that and never tell me? How could you let me think I was okay when I was drowning?" Silence. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know I can't take back what I said, but I'm so sorry. And I need my mom. Please call me back." The voicemail ended. I sat there on the balcony with the phone in my hand, staring at the lake and felt my heart split clean in half. I didn't call her back that day, or the next. I kept the voicemail saved on my phone, and sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, I'd play it again, just to hear her voice, just to remind myself that she was real, that this was real, that I hadn't imagined the entire collapse of our relationship. But I didn't call, because here's what I'd learned in those 3 weeks of silence. I'd spent 68 years responding to other people's needs, Michael's, Vanessa's, my patients. I'd built my entire identity around being needed, being useful, being the person who showed up and fixed things. And the moment I stopped, the moment I chose myself, everything fell apart. Or maybe it had been falling apart all along, and I'd just been too busy holding it together to notice. So I let Vanessa sit with her pain the way I'd been sitting with mine. Not out of cruelty, not out of revenge, but because some lessons can only be learned in the dark. December passed slowly. The lake froze at the edges, and snow fell in soft, persistent waves that blanketed the town in white. Christmas came and went. My first Christmas alone in 43 years. I'd always spent it with Vanessa, even after she married Trevor. We'd go to her house, exchange gifts around her tree, eat ham and scalloped potatoes while the kids tore through wrapping paper. I'd never loved Christmas the way some people did. Too much noise, too much waste. But it had been our tradition, part of the architecture of our relationship. This year I went to Mass at St. Pius X on Christmas Eve. The church was packed, standing room only, families crammed into pews, children fidgeting in their Sunday best. I sat in the back and watched young mothers juggle squirming toddlers, watched elderly couples hold hands during the Our Father, watched teenage girls roll their eyes at their father's off-key singing. And I felt nothing but relief that I wasn't obligated to be anywhere else. After Mass, I walked home through the snow and made myself a grilled cheese sandwich. I sat on the balcony wrapped in my mother's quilt, eating slowly, watching the Christmas lights shimmer on the frozen lake. The couple in the apartment below me was hosting a party. I could hear laughter and music drifting up through the floorboards. Normal people having a normal Christmas. I wasn't lonely. I was just alone, and I was starting to understand the difference. On New Year's Eve, Judith called. I almost didn't answer. I'd been avoiding her too, knowing she'd want to talk about Vanessa, knowing she'd try to play mediator. But my sister was persistent, and eventually I gave in. Ellie. Her voice was careful, like she was talking to someone on a ledge. How are you? I'm fine. You're not fine. Nobody's fine. I didn't argue. How's Vanessa? Judith hesitated. She's struggling. She called me last week. She's trying to sell the house. My chest tightened. What? She can't afford the mortgage, not without Trevor's income, and without... She stopped herself. Without me, I finished. Yeah. I closed my eyes. Vanessa loved that house. She'd picked out every paint color, every light fixture, every piece of furniture. She'd planted hydrangeas in the backyard and hung a porch swing she'd found at an estate sale. That house was her proof that she'd made it, that she'd built something solid and real. Where will she go? I asked. She's talking about renting an apartment, something smaller. She's trying to get her law practice back on track. She's been taking on more clients, working longer hours. The kids they're adjusting. Emma and Lucas. I said their names like a prayer. Are they okay? I don't know, Ellie, I really don't. Vanessa doesn't talk about it much, but I think she's scared. Really scared. Good, I said, and meant it. Judith was quiet for a long moment. You're not coming back, are you? No. She needs you. She needs to learn how to stand on her own. She's your daughter. I know. My voice cracked. I know she is. But I can't keep saving her, Judith. I can't keep erasing myself just to make room for her mistakes. This isn't about mistakes, Ellie. This is about family. Family isn't supposed to make you disappear. Judith sighed. She's sorry. You know that, right? She's really, genuinely sorry. I know. So when are you going to forgive her? I looked out at the lake, dark and infinite under the winter sky. I already have. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back. It just means letting go. We talked for a few more minutes. Small talk, weather, Judith's plans to visit her grandkids in Boise. And then we hung up. I sat there in the silence afterward, feeling the weight of what I'd said settle into my bones. I'd forgiven Vanessa. I really had. But forgiveness and reconciliation weren't the same thing. One was a gift you gave yourself. The other was something that had to be earned. In mid-January, I got a job. Nothing fancy. Just part-time work at a small medical clinic on the outskirts of Coeur d'Alene. They needed a nurse to cover intake appointments 3 days a week. And my 43 years of ICU experience made me wildly overqualified. But I didn't care. I needed something to do. Some way to feel as useful that didn't involve sacrificing myself on someone else's altar. The clinic was run by a husband and wife team, Dr. Patel and Dr. Chen, who'd moved to Idaho from Seattle 5 years earlier looking for a quieter life. They treated mostly elderly patients and families from the surrounding rural areas, people who couldn't afford to drive into Spokane for care. The work was straightforward. Blood pressure checks, medication reviews, wound care, flu shots. Nothing life or death. Nothing that kept me awake at night. It felt like a gift. My co-workers were kind. There was Brenda, a medical assistant in her 50s who baked cookies for the break room every Friday. There was Tom, a young physician's assistant fresh out of school, eager and earnest and constantly asking questions. And there was Margaret, the receptionist, a 72-year-old retired librarian who ran the front desk with military precision and kept a stash of hard candy in her drawer for anxious patients. They didn't know anything about my life before Coeur d'Alene. They didn't ask, and I liked it that way. One afternoon in late January, I was wrapping up a blood pressure check on an elderly man named Roy, a rancher who'd lived in Idaho his whole life, when he looked at me and said, "You seem sad." I glanced up, startled. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." He said it matter-of-factly, the way people do when they've lived long enough to recognize pain in others. "You got that look, like you're carrying something heavy." I didn't know what to say. He leaned forward, his weathered hands resting on his knees. "I lost my wife 3 years ago. Cancer. And for a long time after, I thought I had to keep carrying her memory like a weight. Like if I set it down, I'd be betraying her. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "Don't be. Point is, I finally figured out that loving someone doesn't mean drowning in their absence. It means learning how to swim again." He stood up slowly, his joints creaking. "You'll figure it out too. Just takes time." He left, and I sat there in the exam room with tears streaming down my face. February came, and with it, the first signs of spring. The snow melted. The lake thawed. Crocuses pushed up through the frozen ground, bright purple against the mud. And on Valentine's Day, a Saturday, Vanessa showed up. I was sitting on my balcony reading when I heard the knock. I wasn't expecting anyone. Margaret from the clinic had dropped off a casserole earlier in the week, but she'd already retrieved her dish. I set down my book and opened the door. And there she was, my daughter. She looked terrible. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore jeans and an old Gonzaga sweatshirt that I recognized from her college days. No makeup, dark circles under her eyes. She'd lost weight, too much weight, the kind that comes from stress and skipped meals and sleepless nights. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. I just stood there in the doorway, staring at this ghost of the woman who'd told me to get out 3 months earlier. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. She walked into my apartment slowly, looking around like she was cataloging every detail. The small kitchen, the worn furniture, the 3 photos on the bookshelf. She stopped in front of the picture of her as a baby, the one where she's laughing in Michael's arms, both of them covered in birthday cake. "You kept this," she said. "Of course I did." She turned to face me, and I saw that she was crying. "I didn't think you would. I thought maybe you'd thrown away everything that reminded you of me. I could never do that. But I was so awful to you. I said," her voice broke, "I said terrible things." "Yes, you did." She flinched, but I didn't soften it. She needed to hear the truth. "I drove around for 2 hours before I knocked on your door," she said. "I kept thinking I should turn around, that I didn't deserve to see you, that you'd probably slam the door in my face. I thought about it," I admitted. "Why didn't you?" "Because you're still my daughter. That doesn't change just because you hurt me." She sank down onto my sofa, her hands covering her face. "I don't know where to start." "Start anywhere." So she did. She told me about finding the letter, about sitting on her kitchen floor at 2 a.m, reading it over and over, trying to make sense of the numbers on those bank statements, about the way the truth had hit her like a freight train, not all at once, but in waves, each one more devastating than the last. She told me about Trevor leaving, how he'd packed a bag while she was at work, left a note on the kitchen counter saying he needed space to figure things out, and disappeared. How she'd called him 17 times that night, and he'd finally answered just to tell her he wasn't coming back, that the pressure was too much, that she was too much. "He blamed me," she said. her voice hollow. He said I'd been lying about our finances, that I'd made him think we were fine when we were drowning. And the worst part is, he was right. I had no idea how deep the hole was because you kept filling it in. That wasn't your fault, wasn't it? She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. You were paying our bills, and I was booking vacations to Maui. I was complaining about money while wearing $300 boots. I was so blind, Mom, so entitled. And I took it out on you. I sat down beside her, careful to leave space between us. You didn't know. I should have known. I'm 38 years old. I'm a lawyer. I'm supposed to be smart, but I couldn't even manage my own finances because I'd never had to. You always caught me when I fell. That's what mothers do. No, she shook her head fiercely. That's what you did, because you thought love meant sacrifice. But it doesn't, Mom. It can't. Because look what it did to us. Look what I became. I didn't argue. She was right. I'm selling the house, she continued. It goes on the market next week. I'm moving into a 2-bedroom apartment in West Central. Emma and Lucas are furious with me, with Trevor, with everything. Emma barely speaks to me anymore. Lucas cries every night, and I don't know how to fix any of it. You can't fix it, I said gently. You can only move forward. How? How do I move forward when I've destroyed everything? I reached over and took her hand. It was cold, trembling. You start by forgiving yourself, and then you do the work. She looked at me with those green eyes, my eyes, and I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who climbed into my lap when she was scared, the one who believed I could fix anything. Do you forgive me? She whispered. I thought about it, really thought about it. Not the easy, automatic forgiveness I'd been trained to offer, but the hard kind, the kind that required me to sit with my own pain and decide whether I was ready to let it go. Yes, I said finally. I do. She collapsed into my arms, sobbing, and I held her the way I used to when she was small. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't trying to fix her. I was just letting her break. We sat on my balcony for hours after that, wrapped in blankets watching the light change on the water. She told me about her job, how she'd been working 60-hour weeks trying to rebuild her client base, how she'd taken on pro bono cases she couldn't afford because she didn't know how to say no. She told me about the kids, how Emma was seeing a therapist, how Lucas had started wetting the bed again, how she felt like she was failing them every single day. I don't know how you did it, she said at one point. Raising me alone after Dad died, working all those shifts, never complaining. I complained, just not to you. She smiled faintly. You made it look easy. It wasn't. I was terrified every single day. Terrified I'd mess you up. Terrified I wouldn't be enough. You were always enough, Mom. You were too much. That was the problem. I understood what she meant, and I didn't disagree. As the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Vanessa turned to me and asked the question I'd been waiting for. Can you come home? I'd known she would ask, and I'd already decided on my answer. No, I said. Her face fell. Why not? Because this is my home now, and I need you to understand that I'm not coming back to save you. Not this time. I'm not asking you to save me. I'm asking you to be in my life again. I never left your life, Vanessa. I just left your orbit. She was quiet for a long time, processing that. So what does that mean? We just see each other sometimes? Talk on the phone? Maybe, for now. Until we both figure out what this relationship looks like, when it's not built on my sacrifice. I don't want to lose you again. You won't. But you have to let me be a person, not just your safety net. She nodded slowly. Okay, I can try. That's all I'm asking. We sat in silence after that, watching the last light fade from the sky. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to hope. Vanessa didn't stay in Coeur d'Alene. She drove back to Spokane that night, promising to call when she got home safely. And she did. She called at 11:47 p.m. Just to say she'd made it. Just to say thank you. Just to say, I love you. I said it back, and I meant it. Over the weeks that followed, we talked more. Not every day. We both needed space. But regularly. She'd call on her lunch breaks, tell me about cases she was working on, ask for advice about the kids. I'd listen, offer perspective when she asked for it, and resist the urge to fix things I couldn't fix. She sold the house in March. Emma and Lucas cried when they packed up their rooms, and Vanessa sent me photos of their tear-stained faces with a caption that read, "I'm the worst mother in the world." I called her immediately. "You're not the worst mother," I said. "You're a mother who's doing her best in an impossible situation. There's a difference. It doesn't feel like it. I know, but they'll survive this. Kids are resilient, and they'll respect you more for being honest with them than for keeping up appearances." She was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you did? With me?" "No. I hid everything from you. And look how that turned out." She laughed. A real laugh, surprising both of us. "Yeah, fair point." In April, she invited me to visit the new apartment. I drove to Spokane on a Saturday morning, nervous in a way I hadn't expected to be. The apartment was in an older building in West Central. Nothing like the Craftsman on South Hill, but clean and functional. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a galley kitchen. Vanessa had done her best to make it feel like home. Colorful rugs, plants in the windows, framed artwork she'd salvaged from the old house. Emma and Lucas were polite but distant. They remembered Thanksgiving. They remembered me leaving. I didn't push. I just sat on the floor with Lucas and helped him build a Lego set while Emma watched from the couch, her phone in her lap, but her eyes on us. Before I left, Emma pulled me aside in the hallway. "Mom said you were paying for everything," she said quietly. "Like our whole lives, basically. I helped when I could. She said you sold your jewelry, that you worked extra jobs." I didn't know what to say. "Why didn't you tell us?" Emma asked, and there was something raw in her voice. "Why did you let us think we were fine?" "Because I wanted you to be fine. I wanted you to feel safe. But we weren't safe. We were just living a lie." "I know, and I'm sorry." She looked at me for a long moment, her young face so serious. "Mom's been crying a lot. She thinks we don't hear her, but we do. At night, mostly." My heart broke. "She's going through a hard time." "Yeah, but she's trying. She's really trying." "I know she is." Emma nodded, something shifting in her expression. "I'm glad you came today, Grandma." It was the first time she'd called me that in months. Summer came to Idaho in shades of green and gold. The mountains softened. The lake warmed enough to swim in. I kept working at the clinic, kept volunteering at the food bank, kept attending Mass at St. Pius X. My life had a rhythm now, a shape that felt like mine. Vanessa called every Sunday. We'd talk for an hour, sometimes more, about everything and nothing. Her cases, my patients, books we were reading, recipes we wanted to try. She told me about the therapy she'd started. Real therapy, with a psychologist who specialized in family dynamics and codependency. She told me about the ways she was learning to be accountable, to set boundaries, to live within her means. "It's humbling," she admitted one afternoon in July, realizing how much I didn't know about myself. "That's called growth. It's painful. Most good things are." In August, on what would have been Michael's 73rd birthday, Vanessa drove to Coeur d'Alene unannounced. She brought flowers, white roses, his favorite, and the 3 of us drove out to a cemetery overlooking the lake where Michael's ashes had been scattered years ago. It wasn't his grave exactly, but it was close enough. We stood there in the warm afternoon sun, looking out at the water, and Vanessa said, "I wish he could see who I'm trying to become." "He can," I said. "I'm sure of it." She reached over and took my hand, and we stood there together, mother and daughter, broken and mending. while the wind moved through the trees and the lake stretched out before us like a promise. By the time autumn rolled around again, nearly a year had passed since Thanksgiving 2024. Nearly a year since I'd driven away from Spokane and into a life I'd built from scratch. Vanessa asked if I'd come to her apartment for Thanksgiving dinner. Nothing big, just her and the kids. Maybe Judith, maybe me. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, small and silent, erasing herself to make room for everyone else. I thought about the woman I was now, still learning, still imperfect, but finally taking up space. And I realized I could do both. I could love my daughter and maintain my boundaries. I could show up for my family without losing myself in the process. "I'll come," I told her. "But I'm bringing the green bean casserole." She laughed. I wouldn't have it any other way. On Thanksgiving morning 2025, I drove to Spokane with the casserole on the passenger seat. French's fried onions on top, just a hint of garlic powder. My mother's recipe preserved like a prayer. I parked in front of Vanessa's modest apartment building, took a deep breath and walked to the door. This time, when she opened it, she hugged me first. Not a brief, obligatory squeeze. A real hug. The kind that says, "I see you. I'm sorry. I love you." And I hugged her back. The apartment was warm and smelled like turkey and cinnamon. Lucas was setting the table. Just 4 places, nothing fancy. Emma was mashing potatoes, her phone nowhere in sight. Judith arrived an hour later with wine and stories about her grandkids. We ate together at Vanessa's small kitchen table, passing dishes and laughing at Judith's terrible jokes. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't magazine beautiful. But it was real, and it was ours. After dinner, while the kids did dishes, Vanessa and I stood on the small balcony overlooking the parking lot. It wasn't the lake, it wasn't the mountains, but it was enough. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for asking. I know things aren't fixed. I know we still have work to do. We do, but we're doing it." She looked at me, her eyes bright with tears. "I love you, Mom. And I'm so sorry it took losing you to figure out how to love you better." I pulled her close. "I love you too, and I'm not lost anymore. I'm right here." And I was. Not the woman I used to be, the one who bent and broke and disappeared, but someone new, someone whole. Eleanor Hayes, 69 years old, retired nurse, volunteer, survivor, mother, living in a small apartment by a lake, learning how to take up space, learning how to love without disappearing, learning, finally, how to be enough. For Vanessa, for my grandchildren, for Judith, for the patients at the clinic who trusted me with their care. But most importantly, most powerfully, for myself. "Mind your own business, old lady, and get out of here," my daughter said in front of the whole family. I did that. I packed my things and moved to another city, leaving only a letter. When she read it, she lost her ground.